Being a minority comes with a tendency to hone in on any possible representation you even happen to see. So it's rare to not only see yourself represented in media, but to see more than one trans or black or disabled person in a cast of characters. And in video games in particular, it tends to be a noteworthy exception in the usual lineup of token rap. So imagine our surprise when on June 14th, 2013... Wait, isn't today June 14th? Fudge, this is the anniversary of the official release of The Last of Us in North America. Whoa. Couldn't have planned this better if we tried. But yeah, imagine our surprise 7 years ago when we played The Last of Us for the first time and it has not one, not two, but 4 black people in it? Well, 3 on the day of release, and an extra one 1 year later when the DLC dropped. But anyway, we were beside ourselves. And there wasn't even a hashtag gamer outcry about forcing diversity. Sweet. But Naughty Dog? Why do they all fucking die? This game means so much to us for so many reasons. The story, the mechanics, the atmosphere, Ellie, who we really identified with. Not sure why. Huh. Well, that's probably no reason in particular. Did we mention we played it on release day? So please understand, we love this game, but we gotta unpack this shit. Don't worry, Last of Us. We're only doing this because we love you. So, for the uninitiated, The Last of Us is about a gay girl named Ellie and her reluctant, emotionally abusive father figure, Joel, trekking across the American wasteland on a road trip after a fungi-induced zombie apocalypse decimates most human life 20 years prior. Joel, the father figure, is hardened by losing his daughter of origin at the start of the apocalypse and never fully processed the loss. This, compounded by the terrible things he's done to survive in the 20 years since humanity's collapse, leave him emotionally distant and just grumpy. Ellie is being escorted by Joel to the home base of the Fireflies, a revolutionary group that wants to resurrect the government in the wake of the nationwide martial law by what's left of the US military. Ellie is immune to the zombie fungus and so might be able to help provide a cure for humanity. Ellie's grown up hard and alone since her mom died in childbirth, but her mom's best friend Marlene has been looking out for her ever since. But not very well? Oh, and Marlene is the leader of the Fireflies. Through the course of the story, Joel and Ellie fight with and for each other, surviving infected, hostile groups, and the pain of loss. All while making friends along the way, and learning to trust each other. Slowly, they don't just resemble a father and daughter duo, they are one. Sounds pleasant and endearing. Oh, sorry, I dropped the last page. I almost forgot about the part where Joel kills several pamps loads of fireflies because it turns out they need to kill Ellie to even start to research a cure. But because Joel and Ellie were knocked out in an accident close to the Firefly HQ and brought in by the Fireflies, Marlene just decides to keep Ellie sedated so she doesn't have to ask for consent to cut her best friend's daughter open. So Joel is rightly pissed. Kills the doctor on top of all the other Fireflies. Kills Marlene for good measure. And, in the end, lies to Ellie's face about the whole thing, saying the Fireflies already got their test subjects and it turns out a person's immunity can be reverse engineered. Ellie chooses to believe Joel's obvious lie because
everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
And chooses to live with him in a safe community built by Joel's brother, who was also in the story, but only a little, as a treat. So, you might have heard, The Last of Us is a very heavy game. It has desperation, major character death, and a fudge ton of suicide. Like, it has this thing where you find notes left behind by mostly long gone and dead survivors, and there are a number that have chosen to go out on their own terms. And I know it's a staple of the zombie genre in particular, but It's a lot. It can be a lot for any person, but it's doubly a lot if you're a person of color. See, every single non-white character with more than a handful of dialogue dies, and even one background character. Seeing folks that look like you die in media, especially horror, is a long-standing tradition, not just for black folks, but for minorities in general. So it shouldn't have surprised us. But we're also not used to seeing black people get so much relevance in a story like this, without it being an all-black cast. So having all four of these well-performed, well-written, story-relevant characters in a game got us to let down our guard a bit, which was helped by the ways the game endears you to the characters during gameplay, with optional conversations, and help your allies provide in fights. But in the end, it just kinda chipped at us. One death after another. And a sense of dread builds. And ever since release day, we never really talked about it? Why? Oh, because we didn't want to contend with someone berating us for complaining about a game that has 4 black people in it. Who cares if they die? It's a horror game. Or worse, the person who gets defensive and starts brainstorming reasons to why the characters had to die. Yeah, this is something that happens. If you're someone who gets defensive like this, please check your privilege.
The worst part about it all is explaining it to Sam.
So, Sam and Henry are the first major black fatalities of the game. Sam, the little brother, gets bit and eventually turns, almost mauling Ellie after not telling anyone he got infected the day before, forcing Henry to kill him, before moments later turning the gun on himself in guilty tears. Sam and Henry are not the first character deaths of a party member in the game, but they are the first on-screen ones, since the inciting incident of the story. Tess, Joel's partner, dies in a sad but heroic fashion, although the game spares us the moment of impact, instead choosing to show us just after the death, which tends to leave a pretty strong impact on the player since you have to immediately run away. 1 minute Tess is there, you leave the room, and she's gone forever. Death in The Last of Us tries its best to have weight, even though as a video game the violence you dole out to your enemies ultimately becomes normalized. But there is weight to all the death you see, even for those infected, because of the details of the gore and the magnificent soundscape that let you hear people moaning in pain. We think Henry and Sam serve a dual purpose in the narrative, to provide a foil for Ellie and Joel, subtly showing that Joel trusting Ellie with a gun and respecting her more is a good move, contrasting with the protectiveness Henry has over his brother. The other purpose of the brothers is to give Ellie someone to mourn that isn't a secret she's keeping, like Riley, and isn't someone that means more to Joel than her, like Tess. What makes this clear is when Joel shuts down talk of Tess following her death, it's a little justified. Even if it's not Ellie's fault, she would be the last person he wants to talk to about Tess just dying, since taking the job to smuggle Ellie did lead to Tess's death, as well as the fact that Tess's dying request was for Joel to finish the job. But there is no such pretense with Sam and Henry. Joel and Ellie knew them for the same amount of time, and they both connected with the one of the pair that was closer to their age. So it would be safe to assume, although these deaths hit hard, it would be okay to talk about. After all, they did bury them, as Ellie mentions.
Got to leave that stupid robot on his grave. What should I do with it?
Ellie,
What? I want to talk about it.
no.
Why not?
How many times do we need to go over this? Things happen, and we move on.
It's just...
That's enough.
You're right. I'm sorry.
But Joel shuts this morning talk down too, reinforcing the notion that he never fully processed his daughter's death, and doesn't plan to allow himself, or through proxy Ellie, to process any deaths that they happen to be affected by, because that's how he knows how to survive. This is even foreshadowing for the end of the game, when Joel burns a path through the fireflies and lies about it in order to not lose Ellie. Now those are some really great thematic reasons for those brothers to die. It helps set trajectory for Joel and Ellie for the rest of the story. But you know what that amounts to? Despite the great writing? Sam and Henry being fridged for Ellie to have trauma and show Joel's emotional manipulation a little more. And black people dying for the betterment of white folks is extraordinarily common in media. So Henry and his brother were a wake-up call for us to make this video, because while streaming The Last of Us this week to prepare ourselves for part 2, we had to end the stream for the night because their deaths rocked us so hard. Now keep in mind, we played The Last of Us about 12 times in our life, and we hate to skip cutscenes, so we've seen this moment a lot. But considering current events, seeing black folks die in despair or in anger is crushing. But when we thought about it for a while, we realized it wasn't just the fact that right now there's an unprecedented acknowledgement of black and brown people suffering by so many white people, maybe more than there has ever been, while simultaneously there is an amazing amount of class solidarity happening on top of that. But as great as this is, the amount of black and brown people who have died just to get to this point in history is devastating. And still more every day.
You can still do the right thing here.
Now, Marlene's death is sort of a period on the story of The Last of Us. She may die in a cutscene, but her death signals the end of the game. After that, Joel and Ellie aren't in any on-screen danger for the rest of the game. And considering the time skips after this moment, one could rightly say Marlene's death pivots cleanly into the epilogue. Her death is uniquely tragic, because she's killed by Joel. Whenever we get to this point of the game, we can't stop thinking of... Of course, one of the biggest differences of the scene is Joel's hesitation. It's only for a few seconds. But the other is the fact that Marlene is begging for her life. Now, Joel would be good at cinema sense because he says...
Wait! Let me go. Please.
You just come after her.
Which, considering there's a sequel coming out next week, it's safe to assume if Marlene had survived, she'd be in it. So, it's the most in-character and common sense thing for Joel to do. But it's really fudging sad to me because the Fireflies are this group that represents hope for nearly everyone in the game, especially all the characters that directly help our protagonists. And it has black leadership? What? Back in the day, it was a surprise to us, though we didn't yet know the degree to which black leadership for many movements has historically been suppressed, even amongst leftists, and even to this day. So, having a black woman be the leader of the Fireflies is, and was, an enormous comfort. And although we disagree with Marlene's decision not to give Ellie a choice about whether she was going to give her life for the movement, it was still a heart-wrench to see her die. She feels justified. After all, she's choosing the world over a personal connection. It's not her fudging choice to make, though. It's a double heart-wrench to know that Ellie is barred from even mourning Marlene since Joel doesn't even tell her that she's dead. Like Sam and Henry's death, Marlene's death serves the plot, though her death carries implications that will likely carry into The Last of Us 2. Hi, this is an editing bite. We just realized while editing, a lot of the analysis of The Last of Us revolves around Joel's decision to not let Ellie sacrifice herself. But we never hear about anyone criticizing Marlene for not giving Ellie a choice in sacrificing herself. It's kind of interesting. It's like Joel and Marlene are super abusive and controlling. And in and of itself, Marlene's death might not have hit so hard in isolation, but unfortunately, it's only part of a much bigger whole.
We fight for every second we get to spend with each other. Whether it's 2 minutes or 2 days, we don't give that up.
The last black character death of the game is Riley. And know that chronologically,
Her name was Riley, and she was the first to die.
But if you play the game how the developers recommend, she's the last character you meet. Her and Ellie's relationship is covered in the DLC, and in a Dark Horse comic about how they become friends. Riley's death comes with a sting none of the other black characters' deaths gave us, particularly because her relationship with Ellie is not only endearing, but hella relatable, because it's gay. Gay as hell. But also because the death falls into the ubiquitous bury your gays trope. If you haven't heard of it, I'm sorry we're the first to have to explain it to you. But the overwhelming amount of queer characters in fiction die. So much so that it's a trope. And if they don't all die, part of the couple usually dies, leaving the survivor miserable and alone, or a hardened badass. And The Last of Us nails this trope not once, but twice. There is another queer character in The Last of Us, Bill, who does survive the game, but we find out right before finishing up his section of the game that his partner, or rather, recent ex, kills himself. The only thing we get to see of that relationship is a very angry suicide note. Oh, and Bill saying how human relationships are a liability.
Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. A partner. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing. Getting you killed. So you know what I did? Wising the fuck up. I realized it's gotta be just me.
So yeah, I expected Riley's death to be hella brutal. Fortunately, but also unfortunately, Riley gets to die off screen, even in the DLC. It's to heighten the tragedy of her and Ellie's relationship. Their first kiss happens moments before they're attacked by infected. Riley's idea that she and Ellie should
We can be all poetic and just lose our minds together.
is like Romeo and Juliet level. But they don't even get that ending. The tragedy of Ellie and Riley is Ellie lives. Riley is so important to Ellie's backstory that her biggest mention is at the end of the main game. And if you ask us, can totally represent Ellie fully trusting Joel when she tells him about it. Riley's death looms over Ellie for the whole main game. And maybe it will for her entire life. It's terrible. Ellie tries to connect with Joel throughout the game, despite both of their tendencies not to trust people, and she puts out this final sliver of vulnerability she's been keeping to herself, only for him to deny her the knowledge that he robbed her of the chance to even join Riley in the first place. It's a big bundle of tragic irony, and it slaps. But in the end, all of these amazing black characters in The Last of Us feel somewhat like vehicles for the narrative, and it leaves us really conflicted because it reminds us of how often black people are remembered by the tragedy of their death and used as symbols, but not always remembered as people. Before we wrap up, we wanted to give a little context as to the negative impact of queer representation in The Last of Us. At the time of release of The Last of Us, it was a lot more contentious to include queer characters in your games. So much so that the voice actor for Ellie kinda tried to erase Ellie's queerness after the Left Behind DLC came out, proposing one shouldn't be looking too much into Ellie's sexuality, avoiding the question of would Ellie be gay if the world were different?
I know this is kind of a terrible answer, but I feel like it doesn't really matter. Because I think this is, I mean, I know that kind of sounds like a cop-out answer,
It doesn't
but
at
it's
all.
like,
No, that's what I was driving at, right?
Yeah.
To me, it wasn't all of a sudden Ellie became, oh, she's one of the gay characters in games. You know what I
right,
mean?
yeah. I was going sort of back and forth on it.
Yeah.
But it's like at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters.
Which to us felt gross to hear, despite not even having come out yet in 2014. It reminded us of the notion that homosexuality comes as a last resort for connection in lieu of a straight relationship. Something which straight people have told us in the past is the reason why gay people exist, especially in prisons. Although it is nice to see that Ellie is fully allowed to be gay now. I hope it's not more wall-to-wall gay sadness though. Also, Media framing queer love as beautifully tragic reinforces the notion that something about those relationships is doomed to failure. This isn't the case. And it can really mess you up as a queer person to see so many examples of queer relationships end in a train wreck. The queer characters, like Bill, who believe that they are safer without someone to love, communicates to queer and questioning folk that they may also be safer if they don't act on their queerness.
To make sure I'm not fucking up somehow.
Representation in media is important. It tells a person what they can be. If black kids don't have superheroes that look like them, then they have a harder time identifying with superheroes in general. In a world of systematic oppression, a kid might conclude superheroes aren't made for them. Or if they are, it's in a very limited capacity. There are those that would contest that one can still be inspired by characters who don't look like them. After all, there are white kids who love Static Shock and Cyborg. And we already mentioned that we heavily identify with Ellie. So we don't technically disagree. However, it's hard to deny the effect of a character that does look like you has on you, as many saw when Black Panther came out, or Steven Universe. So many folks feel hella validated. Representation can be life-changing. But when you constantly see people like you being a stepping stone for someone else's growth, existing to suffer, or dying constantly, it can give you the sense that you're expendable, that you're only valuable insofar as your usefulness to a dominant class, or no one cares if the bodies of your community start piling the streets. And that's not a good feeling. It can make you angry. It can make you scared. And media regularly enforces these dynamics, even when they're trying to do good. As The Last of Us clearly shows, the rep in The Last of Us was still more than we ever imagined, and we are glad it exists. But I think it's time to imagine something greater.